Cress Chapter 2. Wolf pushed himself off the crate, hurtling toward her. Cinder braced herself against the instinctive panic. The anticipation of one more hit tightened every muscle, despite the fact that he was still going easy on her. She squeezed her eyes shut moments before impact and focused. Pain shot through her head like a chisel into her brain. She gritted her teeth against it, attempting to numb herself to the waves of nausea that followed. The impact didn't come. "Stop closing your eyes." Jaws still clenched, she forced one eye open and then the other. Wolf stood before her, his right hand in mid-swing toward her ear. His body was still as stone because she was holding him there. His energy was hot and palpable and just out of reach, the strength of her own lunar gift keeping him at bay. "It's easier to have them closed," she hissed back. Even those few words put a strain on her mind, and Wolf's fingers twitched. He was struggling against the confines of her control. Then his gaze flickered past her, and a thump between her shoulder blades sent Cinder tumbling forward. Her forehead collided with Wolf's chest. His body released just in time for him to steady her. Behind her, Thorn chuckled. "It also makes it easier for people to sneak up on you." Cinder spun around and shoved Thorn away. "This isn't a game." "Thorn is right," said Wolf. She could hear his exhaustion, though she wasn't sure whether it came from the constant melee or, more likely, his frustration at having to train such an amateur. "When you close your eyes, it makes you vulnerable. You have to learn to use the gift while still being aware of your surroundings, while still being active within them." "Active?" Wolf stretched his neck to either side, eliciting a few pops before shaking it out. "Yes, active. We could be facing dozens of soldiers at a time. With any luck, you'll be able to control 9 or 10, although that's optimistic at this point." She crinkled her nose at him. "Which means you'll be vulnerable to countless more. You should be able to control me while still being fully present, both mentally and physically." He took a step back, pawing at his messy hair. "If even Thorn can sneak up on you, we're in trouble." Thorn cuffed his sleeves. Never underestimate the stealth of a criminal mastermind. Scarlet started laughing from where she sat cross-legged on a plastic storage crate, enjoying a bowl of oatmeal. "Criminal mastermind? We've been trying to figure out how to infiltrate the royal wedding for the past week, and so far your biggest contribution has been determining which of the palace rooftops is the most spacious, so your precious ship doesn't get scratched in the landing." A few light panels brightened along the ceiling. "I fully agree with Captain Thorne's priorities," said Aiko, speaking through the ship's built-in speakers. "As this may be my big net debut, I'd like to be looking my best. Thank you very much." "Well said, gorgeous." Thorn winked up toward the speakers, even though Aiko's sensors weren't sensitive enough to pick up on it. "And I would like the rest of you to note Aiko's proper use of captain when addressing me. You could all stand to learn a thing or two from her." Scarlet laughed again. Wolf raised an eyebrow, unimpressed, and the cargo bay's temperature clicked up a couple degrees as Aiko blushed from the flattery. But Cinder ignored them all, downing a glass of lukewarm water, while Wolf's admonishments spun through her head. She knew he was right. Controlling Wolf strained every ability she had, but controlling Earthens like Thorn and Scarlet usually came as easy to her as replacing a dead android sensor. By now, she should have been able to do both. "Let's go again," she said, tightening her ponytail. Wolf slipped his attention back to her. "Maybe you should take a break." "I won't get a break when I'm being chased down by the Queen's soldiers, will I?" She rolled her shoulders, trying to re-energize herself. The pain in her head had dulled, but the back of her t-shirt was damp with sweat, and every muscle was trembling from the effort of sparring with Wolf for the past 2 hours. Wolf rubbed his temple. "Let's hope you never have to face off against the Queen's real soldiers. I think we stand a chance going up against her thaumaturges and special operatives, but the advanced soldiers are different, more like animals than humans, and they don't react well to brain manipulation." "Because so many people do," said Scarlet, scraping her spoon against the bowl. His glance flickered toward her, something in his eyes softening. It was a look Cinder had seen 100 times since he and Scarlet had joined the crew of the Rampion, and yet seeing it still made her feel like she was intruding on something intimate. "I mean, they're unpredictable, even under the control of the thaumaturge." He returned his focus to Cinder. or any other Lunar. The genetic tampering they undergo to become soldiers affects their brains as much as their bodies. They're sporadic, wild, dangerous. Thorn leaned against Scarlet's storage tote, fake whispering to her. He does realize that he's an ex-street fighter who still goes by Wolf, right? Cinder bit the inside of her cheek, smothering a laugh. All the more reason for me to be as prepared as possible. I'd like to avoid another close call like we had in Paris. You're not the only one. Wolf started to sway on the balls of his feet again. Cinder had once thought this indicated he was ready for another sparring match, but she'd lately begun to think that's just how he was, always moving, always restless. Which reminds me, she said, I'd like to get some more of those tranquilizer darts whenever we land again. The fewer soldiers we have to fight or brainwash, the better. Tranquilizer darts. Got it, said Aiko. I've also taken the liberty of programming this handy countdown clock. T-minus 15 days, 9 hours until the royal wedding. The net screen on the wall flickered to life, displaying an enormous digital clock counting down by the 10th of a second. 3 seconds of staring at that clock made Cinder sick with anxiety. She tore her gaze away, scanning the rest of the net screen and their ongoing master plan for putting a stop to the wedding between Kai and Queen Lavanna. A list of needed supplies was jotted down the left side of the screen. Weapons, tools, disguises, and now tranquilizer darts. In the middle of the screen was a blueprint of New Beijing Palace. On the right, a ridiculously long preparation checklist, none of which had yet to be checked off, though they'd been planning and plotting for days. Number 1 on the list was to prepare Cinder for when she would inevitably come face to face with Queen Lavanna and her court again. The wolf hadn't said it outright. She knew her lunar gift wasn't improving fast enough. Cinder was beginning to think that item could take years to reach satisfactory completion, and they only had 2 more weeks. The rough plan was to cause a distraction on the day of the wedding that would allow them to sneak into the palace during the ceremony and announce to the world that Cinder was truly the lost Princess Celine. Then, with all the world's media watching, Cinder would demand that Lavanna relinquish the crown to her, ending both the wedding and her rule in one fell swoop. Everything that was supposed to follow the wedding blurred in Cinder's mind. She kept imagining the reactions of the Lunar people when they discovered that their long-lost princess was not only cyborg, but also entirely ignorant of their world, culture, traditions, and politics. The only thing that kept her chest from being crushed by the weight of it all was the knowledge that, no matter what, she couldn't possibly be any worse of a ruler than Lavanna. She hoped they would see it that way too. The glass of water sloshed in her stomach. For the 1000th time, a fantasy crept into her thoughts of crawling beneath the covers of her crew-issued bunk bed and hiding until all the world forgot there had ever been a lunar princess in the first place. Instead, she turned away from the screen and shook out her muscles. "All right, I'm ready to try again," she said, settling into the fighting stance that Wolf had taught her. But Wolf was now sitting beside Scarlet and polishing off her oatmeal. Mouth full, he dipped his eyes to the floor and swallowed. "Push-ups." Cinder dropped her arms. "What?" He gestured at her with the spoon. "Fighting isn't the only type of physical exertion. We can build up your upper body strength and train your mind at the same time. Just try to stay aware of your surroundings. Focus." She glowered for a full 5 seconds before dropping to the ground. She'd counted to 11 when she heard Thorn push himself away from the crate. "You know, when I was a kid, I was tricked into thinking that princesses wore tiaras and hosted tea parties. Now that I've met a real princess, I must say, I'm kind of disappointed." She didn't know if he meant it as an insult, but these days the word princess set every one of Cinder's nerves on edge. Exhaling sharply, she did just as Wolf had instructed. She focused, easily picking up on Thorn's energy as he passed by her on his way toward the cockpit. She was lowering into the 14th push-up when she forced his feet to stall beneath him. "What?" Cinder pushed up and swung one leg forward in a half-circle. Her ankle collided with the back of Thorn's calves. He cried out and fell, landing on his backside with a grunt. Beaming, Cinder glanced up at Wolf for approval, but both he and Scarlet were too busy laughing. She could even see the sharp points of Wolf's canine teeth that he was usually so careful to keep hidden. Cinder stood and offered Thorn a hand. Even he was smiling. though it was coupled with a grimace as he rubbed his hip. "You can help me pick out a tiara when we're done saving the world."